I'm Bonnie Lin, Director of the ChinaPower Project and Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic International Studies. In this episode of the ChinaPower Podcast, we will be exploring Brics, an intergovernmental organization comprised of 10 countries, including Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and others. What is the goal of Brics, and how do China's interests fit with the organization? What is driving the recent increase in member states? And with the new U.S. administration, how do we expect Brics countries to evolve over the next 4 years? To explore these questions and more, we're joined by Dr. Mihaela Papa. Dr. Papa is a Brics expert from MIT's Center for International Studies, where she serves as the Director of Research and Principal Research Scientist. Before joining MIT, she co-founded and led the Rising Power Alliances project and taught sustainable development and global governance at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. She began her Brics research over a decade ago as a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Law School and a visiting scholar at Fudan University's Center for Brics Studies. Dr. Papa has published extensively on the rise of new powers and their coalition-building efforts in leading academic journals. Her commentaries have also been featured in Foreign Affairs, The Conversation, as well as on Bloomberg, BBC, South China Morning Post, and other media outlets. Originally a trade economist with a BA from Croatia, she completed her MA in Law and Diplomacy and PhD in International Relations at the Fletcher School, Tufts University. Mihaela, it's great to have you on the podcast to talk about Brics, as I know you've been developing the field of Brics studies in the United States, and now most recently at MIT. It would be great to start off this conversation by asking you, why are the Brics so important, and how would you characterize the core goals or objectives of the Brics?
Thank you so much for having me. So the Brics group is at the intersection of many important trends that shape contemporary international relations. In a way, it is a platform for negotiating the rise of new powers like China. And it actually tests their ability to work with other important players in the system. Brics countries are also central to addressing major global development challenges. So if we think about climate change, food security, health, artificial intelligence, they are key players, and their policy convergence can have major implications for other countries. And then, in terms of international relations scholarship, Brics is an institutional innovation. International relations scholars have often been focused on formal international organizations like World Trade Organization, IMF, or alliances, and also, on the other hand, on informal coalitions. And Brics actually falls somewhere in the middle. It is a hybrid institution, and it's interesting to see how such an experiment can work for broader international relations. But ultimately, for me, the bottom line is that the group stands out in its ambition to change the whole system of global governance. And it has the critical mass of countries to do so. So, in terms of the overarching goals, its 2009 declaration outlined that it wants to especially change global economic and financial infrastructure and global governance more broadly, and seek a more democratic and just multipolar world order. So, on the one hand, Brics as a group is externally oriented, but on the other hand, it also seeks to advance cooperation while serving common interests of emerging market economies and developing countries. It has this dual feature, external and internal policy coordination.
And Mihaela, how fast is the Brics expanding? You mentioned its desire to be more democratic and more inclusive. And I know this January, Indonesia joined as a full member of the Brics. What's driving the interest of countries to join the Brics?
The Brics group has expanded very fast over the past 2 years. There are 2 maybe larger trends and 3 very practical reasons for that. So in terms of larger trends, there has been an increase of interest more generally in informal institutions, particularly in the countries of the global south. So it's not uncommon in this day and age to be wanting to join such institutions. And then there is another aspect, which is geopolitical uncertainty. So basically, states want to increase their bargaining leverage, and they're more likely to resort to align with multiple institutions. So we are talking now about these multi-alignment policies, multi-vectorism trends. At the same time, aligning with different powers to basically be able to have more strategic autonomy, whatever happens. And then there is also a practical reason. So first of all, the cost of joining has been relatively low. I mean, in terms of like participating in meetings, and there is a prospect of both political and economic benefits. So BRICS has a menu of various cooperation areas, and then some countries get attracted to de-dollarization. Some countries want to work on energy. Some countries want to work on agriculture, health, and so on. But generally, countries are interested in energizing South-South cooperation and multilateralism. And then there are also countries that see joining BRICS as an increase in status, increase in their relevance in their regions. Probably the most natural joiners are the ones that have tensions with the West. They can perceive BRICS as a way to challenge Western agendas. But at the same time, there is a lot of fear of missing out because BRICS has positioned itself as an innovation platform or as a group that's changing the system. And this is appealing for many countries because they want to be part of the reform efforts. All that said, this does not explain the actual jump over the past 2 years. And this jump can be explained not only by what are other countries doing, but what are BRICS members itself doing. And it has been a lot of championing of outreach, of engagement, and actual recruitment efforts have been going on. And in a way, when we have a situation where many countries are questioning US global leadership on the financial front following the financial crisis and also responses to geopolitical conflicts, and then having BRICS show that they can develop an alternative system in the sense of create new institutions, new development bank. So countries are in a way rethinking and weighing costs and benefits and deciding that they want to be engaged, both with US and with China and BRICS more generally.
Thank you, Mihaela. I think one of the reasons BRICS have definitely attracted more attention in the United States is, as you mentioned, many countries that have joined might be different or opposed to what the United States seeks. And I think among those countries, the one that really worries the United States is China. From your perspective, what is China's role in the BRICS? Is it the main driver behind the organization? And what do you see as China trying to gain from both the BRICS as well as the expanded membership?
So in practice, we cannot really say that BRICS has a driver because it operates through a symmetry format with rotating presidencies. So the chair of the group who holds the presidency is the formal driver for that year, because that's basically the country that plans the priorities and agenda for that year. And this rotates every year. When China had presidencies, it was definitely driving the agenda. It was particularly active and predominantly seeking to advance trade, and it would propose generally new economic initiatives. So China has played a major role, of course, in developing the new development bank and the contingent reserve arrangement, both in terms of hosting the bank's headquarters, but also providing additional funding for the contingent reserve arrangement. That said, informally, China has been crucial as a country that raised the status of the group and also its appeal, because many countries want to join BRICS to develop closer relations with China. And also we see countries joining BRICS after an increase of trade with China. China has advocated for a long time for expansion, and in a way, China has never viewed BRICS as this privileged club of select powers, but more as a tool to advance its multilateral initiatives. So in a way, the effort was to make it more inclusive, more development-centered, to think about China in the context of the global south and overall development agenda. Also, it was very difficult to develop BRICS in its original format. New countries, in a way, bring new opportunities, particularly in the trade context. BRICS also allows China to showcase a new form of collective leadership in terms of how to think about leadership in global governance in the non-Western context. Some of the specific BRICS initiatives, like moving away from the dollar, reorienting supply chains, rethinking trade flows, encouraging trade flows among BRICS, and different economic benefits that BRICS cooperation can offer, are appealing to China, especially currently with some of the challenges in terms of its own economic growth.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on what you meant by saying that China is using the BRICS to showcase a new form of collective leadership? What is this new form that China is demonstrating, and how is it different from how other organizations are run or U.S. leadership?
The questions that were discussed about leadership in global governance have often been linked to questions of unipolarity, bipolarity, and then basically the BRICS represents a multipolar format of leadership. It basically advocates leadership that's not ideologically focused or doesn't privilege a certain ideology. It is a model in a way of global pluralism, and it is not at this point fully shaped. It's just an experiment for how non-Western leadership can work. So in a way, China is experimenting with the countries it wants to lead and with different mechanisms, how it can use its power across different bodies. So it is part of G20, it is part of BRICS, and it can learn and reflect on the best way and what's closest to its own vision and values about the international system.
So when you reference multipolar format of leadership and linking that to what you said earlier, that there's no one main driver behind the organization, are you suggesting that this type of Chinese collective leadership that it's exercising in the BRICS affords other countries as much power to influence the BRICS as China does?
In theory, yes. In theory, all the powers have equal opportunity to advance BRICS agenda. Of course, in practice, there are huge power asymmetries between China and other BRICS members. And sometimes you can see that these power asymmetries are a barrier to deepening of cooperation. So, for example, when China initially wanted to deepen trade cooperation and do like a free trade zone among BRICS, other countries had concerns about these power asymmetries. So in a way, China's power is appealing for other BRICS members, but it also can work as a barrier to deepening of cooperation when these members have concerns about being overwhelmed by certain Chinese initiatives.
So related to that, we also know that Chinese President Xi Jinping has expressed the idea that the BRICS countries should be forerunners in reforming global governance. What do you see as China's future ambitions there for the BRICS? And how will China use the BRICS to carry forward some of these goals?
We can think about the current moment in a way of foreign policy reset after a decade of active Chinese engagement abroad. So a decade ago, China experimented with three very different initiatives where it engaged with foreign partners in different ways. Belt and Road Initiative, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and BRICS. And BRICS was for a long time almost like a third wheel in the early 2010s in terms of policy attention, in terms of resources, and also institutional growth. But what is happening now is that BRICS has become a centerpiece of China's foreign policy, and there are new opportunities for China because some of the initiatives that China has been championing for a long time, like expansion, increasing trade, have now become mainstream priorities for all BRICS members. At the same time, the Trump administration's America First policy and the practice of less multilateralism or thin multilateralism gives China a lot of room to maneuver in the multilateral context. Right now, China has, in a way, a blank slate or a reset for thinking where it wants to develop different initiatives. So now, when we think about Shanghai Cooperation Organization, it has been predominantly security focused. Now it's moving much more into economics. When we look at the new development bank, it's a question whether it will expand and who will be added. And then when we look at BRICS group itself, it is engaging in major new initiatives. So China can currently look at these three tracks as separate tracks, but it can also at the same time think about how it can achieve synergies across the BRICS group, BRICS New Development Bank, and Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and actually have multilateral impact at scale, whether in the context of trade and finance or in the context of other technical or issue area initiatives.
Great, thank you. I now want to focus on two specific aspects of the BRICS, and one is the role of BRICS related to innovation. During the most recent BRICS summit, President Xi Jinping expressed the idea that BRICS should be more committed to innovation, and China also recently launched a China BRICS AI Development and Cooperation Center. How effective do you think the BRICS will be in terms of driving innovation or similar initiatives across the BRICS countries?
If BRICS wants to establish itself as a norm-making institution, it's important to work on the areas where regulation is needed and the members can produce something new. It may be also easier to develop new regulation than to change existing regulation. So work on innovation and artificial intelligence where a lot of regulation is still needed sounds very promising. That said, the BRICS group actually set the stage for AI cooperation and general innovation work actually 10 years ago in 2015 Memorandum of Understanding in Science, Technology and Innovation. And AI has not been an active part of that agenda in 2015, but it became through China's presidencies because China has been actively working to put AI on the agenda. And maybe like in 2023 was a breakthrough with BRICS founding an AI study group. And the idea was to jointly fend off risks and develop AI governance frameworks and standards. And then Russia picked up the agenda and talked more about AI ethics. But overall, when we look at the agenda that has been like 10 years old and AI being mentioned in 2017 as an area to focus on, and now it's like 2025, what we can deduct is that there is not enough cohesion around that agenda to accelerate its growth. And for issues like AI and its applications, you need a lot of trust among members to move forward quickly. One area where I see AI moving forward quickly is looking at AI in the context of sustainable development and like how AI can advance for good AI to help with sustainable development and meeting sustainable development goals. So I think this is one area where a lot of countries are interested in contributing, while other areas like AI ethics and the actual governance format might be more difficult to agree to.
It seems that one area that most BRICS countries agreed to more on is de-dollarization. In 2023, you wrote that a BRICS currency is unlikely to dislodge the dollar anytime soon, but it signifies a growing challenge to the established US-led economic order. And then this year, we've seen that President Trump has started to sanction BRICS members for its de-dollarization. Are BRICS countries trying to reduce the primacy of the US dollar? And if so, how successful have they been from your perspective?
The dollar's dominance is very strong, and it's very difficult to basically change the system. 57% share of global foreign exchange reserves and 88% share of foreign exchange transactions are in dollar. Generally, to even get to these percentages, there needs to be action at scale. And overall trend economically has been when you have advances in technology, market efficiencies, and digitalization, that you try to cut out intermediaries. And the reality is that the US dollar is an intermediary currency because it serves as the global reserve currency. So there is an issue of diversifying and moving away from the dollar, but there is also a parallel issue of basically digitalization, changing the demand for dollar and changing the way the transactions are conducted. So BRICS has for a long time been seeking to move away from the dollar or actually reduce its over-reliance on the dollar and diversify currency portfolios. And there are different drivers. One is the financial weaponization, the idea of like freezing foreign reserves, the idea of using threat of sanctions or being cut off from financial infrastructures. There is also a challenge of the erosion of trust in the dollar stability, thinking about whether to stay focused on US monetary policy and the questions about US fiscal health. There are also questions of asserting economic sovereignty. So a lot of times you can see Brics countries talking about the development of their own financial markets, desire for their localized trade. If the US is a small part of their trade, why keep dollar dominant? And why not do currency swaps? Why not do different types of arrangements? Where de-dollarization is actually happening, there is already evidence of rising use of local currencies in trade among Brics countries. Of course, China and Russia are here leading the way with de-dollarization of bilateral economic relations. And then there are other countries as well, like China, Brazil, and so on. But then there is also a shift in non-dollar reserves. There has been a big demand from central banks in terms of using gold reserves. Then there is also this parallel story of internationalization of yuan. So a lot of countries are thinking about increasing use of yuan in trade with China. So the main challenge remains how to de-dollarize at scale. And there are several things happening on that front where de-dollarization is moving from a bilateral focus to a multilateral priority. So in a way, 2023 Johannesburg summit actually gave countries a deadline to examine how they can move away from the dollar and use more local currencies. And in 2024, Brics actually put down different options for transitioning to local currencies in their declaration and the projects they are working on to do so. So there is a really systematic effort to try to see how to transition to local currencies.
And if I could follow up there, what are some of the next steps to transition to local currencies?
So a big one is developing an international payment system. And this is the one where Brazil is now taking charge. So basically the entire agenda that was from monetary coordination agenda that Russia was advancing during its presidency last year is the one that's taken over by Brazil. And Brazil has been championing monetary coordination for a very long time. Actually, Brazil took an even bigger step that President Lula is known to want a Brics currency that resembles the process like the euro currency. But this is not something that's accepted by other members. So there was no interest in starting a Brics currency among the members. So that's not going to be the main area of development. But finding out about the feasibility and possibilities surrounding the international payment system is. And also Brics is starting Brics Grain Exchange, which will have a de-dollarization component within it. So that's another area probably to watch in terms of de-dollarization.
Mihaela, you mentioned some of the de-dollarization efforts, or at least the use of local currency efforts, were led by China and Russia using their local currencies. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you see as the Brics relationship to what some in the US call the axis of upheaval, axis of resistance, axis of autocracies, which is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I know that China, Russia, and Iran are already part of the Brics. I've also read that North Korea is interested in joining the Brics, but it seems to me that it's not going to happen anytime soon, but welcome your thoughts on that. To what extent do you view the Brics as enabling this potential axis and the goals that China, Russia, Iran may have for the international system?
I see China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea as countries definitely to be on the US watch list, but I would not necessarily call them an axis. To be an axis, they would need to present a unified front, which is not yet the case. Russia and Iran are ideologically quite different from China in terms of their more explicit anti-Western posture. And China and actually Russia's world majority foreign policy concept itself recognizes that China remains committed to working with the West to reimagine the multilateral system, while Russia is much more skeptical about working with the West and basically seeks to advance alternatives to the system. And when I look at North Korea, its international interests are generally limited, and it has not aspired to be a major international player. So definitely, Brics enables China, Russia, and Iran to become an axis of change because it helps them reposition themselves as innovators and also embed their ideas into these global south narratives. But in terms of championing de-dollarization, I would think the link between Russia, Brazil, and Iran is the one to watch.
Why is the link between Russia, Brazil, and Iran the one to watch for champion de-dollarization?
Brazil currently has the BRICS presidency, and that is the item on the agenda in terms of advancing how far what Russia has done over the past year in terms of progress on this agenda, how far Brazil can take over and advance.
So stepping back on the specific issues that we've been talking about, including de-dollarization, BRICS cooperation on artificial intelligence, how effective would you say the BRICS are? And are there limits to partnership or working within the BRICS? Because we often hear, for example, that India probably plays a different role in the BRICS than what China and Russia might want. From your perspective, do you view the BRICS as effective and impactful?
BRICS has been effective in the sense of bringing together very diverse countries and experimenting with cooperation on a very large number of issue areas. It has developed deeper cooperation on very many issues, especially in the field of development finance, agriculture, health, trade. It has been advancing new initiatives, and it has been responding to political events together in a way that can constrain or change the game for other players in the system. So one area where BRICS made a difference before, it started as a group of rapidly growing large economies, but their growth has slowed over the years. So politically, it was designed as a group of large economies, and that was its brand in a way. But its format has evolved with the introduction of new members. So now the group finds itself in a critical juncture where it needs to demonstrate that it can still have impact, but in this new format. The last BRICS summit showed that their cooperation is still possible, and they can agree to set priorities together, that they can agree on joint initiatives that are new initiatives. But of course, the question is what will be implemented. Much has been made about China-India conflict within BRICS, and even in the early days of BRICS cooperation, this conflict was cited as an example of why BRICS would never be more than a talking shop. Yet what we have seen is both countries managed to compartmentalize the conflict and basically continue deepening their cooperation. BRICS played a role in peacemaking in a way, because before the BRICS summit, there was a breakthrough in the China-India relationship in terms of managing the border conflict. Now, the expansion possibly offers both opportunities but also challenges. On the one hand, it raises transaction costs, but on the other hand, it increases bargaining space because more agreements are possible and more ideas will be brought for BRICS to work on.
And Mihaela, related to the effectiveness of the BRICS, in what ways are you seeing the BRICS being successful in attempting to counter U.S. influence, particularly in the economic and political spheres?
There are three main ways. So the big picture is that BRICS positions itself as a diversity, equity, inclusion movement at the global level. And especially less US-friendly BRICS countries discuss US role in the system in the context of oppression, minority elite rule, and working against true multilateralism. However, BRICS does not step up with reform proposals when the United States is willing to reform the system and actually increase representation. Reforming the United Nations Security Council is a case in point. Similarly, the BRICS group seeks to lead in global governance, but it has not systematically addressed its own contribution to the climate crisis. Second, BRICS is providing diplomatic countermeasures. The fact that the recent BRICS summit took place in Russia and that other BRICS keep deepening their cooperation with Russia counters US efforts to both isolate and weaken Russia. And then finally, there's a question of global agenda setting. BRICS is defining cooperation priorities and advancing cooperation on space and many other agendas where their priorities are quite different from the US priorities and where the US can be constrained in its own efforts to advance these issues.
Okay, great. Thank you. The final question I have for you is, how do you expect BRICS to evolve under a Trump presidency? And what recommendations do you have for the U.S. on navigating its relationship with the BRICS?
With respect to BRICS, Trump presidency represents a policy shift for the United States. The Biden administration did not have an explicit BRICS policy. And the leading officials would state that the group was not a geopolitical threat, that states can choose their alignments, and that the United States will continue developing bilateral relations with the BRICS countries. The current administration is very clear that BRICS represents a threat, and it offers a policy response. Both President Trump and his leading foreign policy officials, such as Marco Rubio, have previously discussed BRICS and have been concerned about the future of the dollar. We can see that at the 2024 BRICS summit in Russia, BRICS invited 13 partners to join the group, including Turkey and Vietnam. But Turkey and Vietnam have still not confirmed that they are joining as partners, and they seemed very interested back several months ago during the summit. So it seems that the Trump threat has made a difference. Both of them are important trade partners and have a trade relationship with the US. So in terms of the US navigation of the relationship with BRICS, it's important to understand the power of the narrative of change and mobilization. It's also important to track BRICS coalition building and where exactly US interests can be challenged, especially since BRICS cooperation relies on many mutually beneficial and cross-cutting ties, which are likely to persist and which are likely to keep tying countries to the group. So in a way, thinking about BRICS not as something that can be broken, but something that needs to be managed very carefully, and the relationships need to be managed very carefully. And then finally, there's a question of the US engagement in terms of multilateralism and especially climate change, and the challenge of basically rethinking and reimagining global governance in a way that works for the United States. And the first starting point here would be to think about how to reset relations with China so that global cooperation remains possible, but also how to preserve strong relations with the EU at a time when climate change and multilateralism, which are key EU priorities, are not necessarily the priorities of the Trump administration. So I think these are some of the areas where I see that the relationships will need to be navigated very carefully and very pragmatically.
Thank you, Mihaela, for this wide-ranging conversation on the BRICS and for your explanation of what the BRICS are doing as well as what they're not doing. Really appreciate you joining me today, and we also look forward to your future research at MIT on the BRICS.
Thank you so much for having me.